Montana Territory, October 1879. The first frost had come hard that morning, biting into the land with a silence that made everything still. As the sun edged over the Bitterroot Mountains, Zachary Tate rode along the creek's bend, his breath clouding in the cold air, reins loose in his hand. He was not looking for anything, just moving, like he always did. Until he saw her. She was crouched by the icy creek, arms wrapped around her knees, dress soaked and torn at the hem. Her hair hung in tangled waves down her back, and her lips were blue. She looked like she had not slept in days. Zachary pulled his horse to a stop. "Miss?" She flinched and tried to stand but stumbled, catching herself on a slick rock. Her eyes met his wide, wild, and full of fear. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low. He dismounted slowly, holding his hands where she could see them. "You're freezing. Come on, let me help." She did not speak right away. Her body shook hard, like she was barely holding herself together. But when he stepped closer, she did not run. I just needed to keep them warm," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Zachary looked around. "Who?" She turned her head, and that was when he saw them, two small figures curled beneath a thin blanket beside a fallen log. A girl and a boy, both under 10, huddled together with their cheeks flushed red from the cold. "My babies," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, they're so cold." Zachary was already moving. He dropped to one knee beside the children, checked their breathing slow but steady, and shrugged off his coat. He wrapped it around all three of them, then pulled his saddle blanket free and added that too. "You can't stay here," he said gently. "There's a cabin a few miles west. Mine. Come with me." She hesitated, her arms tightening around her children. "I do not know you. My name's Zachary Tate. I live alone. Got firewood, food, and dry clothes. You and your little ones need all three." She looked down at her children, then back up at him. "I am Hattie Vaughn. This is Polly and Peter." Zachary gave a slow nod. "All right, Hattie. Let's get them warm." He helped her lift the children onto his horse, bundling them tight. He took Hattie's hand, it was like ice, and helped her up behind them. Then he led the horse on foot, keeping a steady pace toward home. The walk was quiet. Hattie did not speak again, and Zachary did not push. Her grip on the children was tight. He noticed her limp, the way she favored one leg, but she kept walking. She was stronger than she looked. By the time they reached his cabin tucked between the trees, the sky was thick with gray. Zachary opened the door, the scent of pine and smoke drifting out. He got the fire roaring quick, set a kettle to boil, and laid out quilts near the hearth. Hattie lowered the children down carefully, brushing hair from their faces. As the warmth began to settle into the room, color returned to their cheeks. Zachary handed her a tin cup of warm water. "You hurt?" he asked. "My ankle," she admitted. "Twisted yesterday. We had to sleep out there. I could not walk far." He crouched beside her, careful. "May I see it?" She nodded, and he gently lifted her skirt just enough to see the swollen joint. He fetched a clean rag, wrapped it tight, and set her foot on a folded sack. "Should rest it a few days," he said. "I did not know where else to go," she murmured, eyes on the fire. "Their father left last spring. I waited, but he never came back. We ran out of food. Everything else came next." Zachary sat back on his heels. "You got folks anywhere?" "No," she said softly. "Just us." He looked at the children asleep by the fire, Polly's little hand curled tight around Peter's. Then he looked at Hattie. Her eyes were tired but clear. She had not broken, not really. She had just run out of road. "You can stay here," he said, "until you're strong again. Longer if you want." She blinked, surprised. "Why?" Zachary stood and stoked the fire. "Because no one should be alone when the cold comes." That night, he gave her his bed and kept watch by the hearth. The children slept close, faces peaceful for the first time in who knew how long. And Hattie, she looked over at him once through the dim light, her eyes soft with something he had not seen before. Not fear. Not suspicion. Trust. He nodded once, then leaned back in the rocker. For the first time in a long while, something warm settled in his chest. He had not set out looking for anything that morning. But maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth staying for. The next morning broke slowly, light filtering through the small window panes, pale and gold like it hadn't made up its mind to stay. Zachary stepped out to split kindling before the frost softened. His boots crunched over the frozen ground, and the axe handle felt familiar in his grip, solid in a way little else had lately. Inside, Hattie sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched as she stitched a tear in Polly's shawl. Her fingers moved with practiced care, though she winced when she shifted her ankle. Polly traced steam on the window glass with one finger while Peter crouched near the hearth, nudging a charred log with a stick Zachary had whittled down the evening before. "I can sweep and wash, if you've a bucket and soap," Hattie said when Zachary came back in, his arms full of split wood. "You don't need to worry about that. I'd rather keep my hands busy," she said. "And I won't have my children raised lazy." Zachary nodded and set the wood by the stove. "There's lye soap on the shelf. Buckets hanging near the well." She leaned forward, testing her weight on the bad foot. "I'll manage." He didn't argue. Instead, he passed her a boiled potato wrapped in a cloth and knelt beside Peter, who had started to hum tunelessly. "You like animals?" Zachary asked him. Peter nodded. "We saw a deer once. Mama said it had a soul behind its eyes." "That sounds like her," Zachary said, glancing toward Hattie. "There's a pair of mules out back. Maybe you can help feed them come morning." Peter's eyes lit up, and he nodded again, but didn't speak. Zachary didn't press. He let the boy sit with the idea, quiet and warm. By afternoon, Hattie had managed to get herself out onto the porch, braced on a chair with a blanket around her shoulders. She watched the treetops sway against the sky, a tin basin of peeled apples beside her. "Where'd you grow up?" Zachary asked, sitting on the top step with a knife and another apple in hand. "East Tennessee," she said. "Near a river, but not close enough to see it from the house. My daddy fixed wagons. My mama taught me to sew and keep chickens from dying stupid deaths." Zachary chuckled. "Useful skills." She gave a breath of a laugh. "They were good people." "Died of fever when I was 16. I married Tom Vaughn 2 winters after that. Thought we'd make a life." Zachary didn't say anything. He kept slicing the apple, tossing skins into the grass. "Tom had charm," she said. "But charm don't keep a man home. He was always chasing something: gold, land, a better deal. I held things together best I could." Zachary looked over his shoulder at the children playing with sticks along the fence. "You did more than that." "I don't know," she said. "I'm here because I didn't know what else to do." Zachary set the knife down. "You came through snowfall, with 2 little ones and nothing but grit. That counts." She looked at him, then really looked. "Why are you alone?" He shifted, picked up the apple again. "I came north after the war. Left family behind in Missouri. Figured quiet and distance were what I needed. Figured wrong, maybe." "You lost someone?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "A girl I planned to marry. She waited through the war, but not through what came after. I wasn't the same when I came back. Couldn't blame her." Hattie didn't offer pity. Just peeled another apple and let that silence settle between them. When the sun dipped low, Polly ran up with windburn on her cheeks. "Mama, can we stay here till Christmas?" Zachary stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. He looked down at Hattie. She didn't answer right away. Then she touched Polly's hair gently. "We'll see, chickadee. We'll see." That night Zachary brought out an old book of railroad maps, and Peter sat close, tracing lines with his finger. Hattie lingered near the table, mending a sleeve with slow, even stitches. Her movements had steadied. Her eyes followed Zachary when he stood to stir the stew on the stove, and when he sat again, she didn't look away. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls like a tired animal looking for shelter. Inside, the fire threw soft light across worn floorboards and faces beginning to ease. Zachary leaned back in his chair, one hand resting beside the map, and listened to the children's quiet breathing. He didn't speak, but something inside him settled for the first time in years. Not in words. Just in the way the silence didn't feel so empty anymore. By the third day, the snow came. It started as a light drift, barely enough to touch the fences, then thickened by mid-morning into steady white. Sound fell away beneath it, the world hushed under the weight of winter's first true arrival. Inside the cabin, the warmth held. Zachary stood at the stove, lifting the kettle to pour water for cornmeal mush. The children were still drowsy, curled together on a bed of quilts by the wall, their breath rising slow and steady. Hattie sat near the window, mending a bootlace with her leg propped on a stool and a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You always live this quiet?" she asked, not looking up. He stirred the pot with the back of a wooden spoon. "I used to think I liked quiet. And now?" He glanced at her. "Now I think I got used to it because there wasn't anything else." She nodded, fingers still working the needle through worn leather. "I used to dream of noise. Laughter, voices in another room, a door opening and closing without worry. I didn't need much, just something steady." Zachary set the spoon down and leaned his hip against the counter. "You ever have it?" "Once, maybe." When Polly was still learning to talk and Peter made forts out of pantry crates. It didn't last long, but it felt like something that might. She tied off the lace and set the boot down. Her eyes found his steady. "You were in the war, weren't you?" He nodded once. "Rode with the 3rd Missouri. Spent 2 winters chasing ghosts and sleeping in mud." "Did you lose anyone?" "Too many to name." They sat with that answer, the snow tapping against the windows like fingers too cold to knock. Zachary moved to the hearth, crouched, and added another log to the fire. "I tried going back," he said, "after Appomattox. But the house was gone, and the land was someone else's. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere after that." "Maybe belonging's not about land," she said. "Maybe it's about how you're looked at. How you're needed." He turned toward her, firelight warming the edges of his face. "You believe that?" "I'm starting to." Polly stirred on the floor, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Peter sat up a moment later, blinking toward the window. "Snow," he said in a small voice. Zachary walked over and crouched beside them. "You ever seen it fall like this?" Peter shook his head. "Will it trap us?" "No," Zachary said, reaching for Polly's hand to help her up. "We got enough wood, enough food. And if we keep the fire fed, the cold won't touch us." Hattie rose slowly, testing her weight, though she didn't wince as sharp as before. She crossed to the cupboard and pulled down a tin of dried apples. "We could bake something," she said. "Give them something warm to remember." Zachary gave a quiet nod. "Flowers in the barrel. Lards on the shelf." The children lit up at the talk of pie, and soon the cabin filled with the soft sounds of mixing and measuring. Polly stood on a chair, hands dusted in flour, while Peter counted apple slices with his tongue between his teeth. Zachary rolled out dough beside Hattie, his movements careful, deliberate. She glanced at him once, and in that moment, her face changed, not softened, exactly, but opened, like something long guarded was loosening. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked, voice low. "I think about it every morning I wake up and the past hasn't followed me." She nodded slowly, pressing the crust into place. "I think maybe we've both come far enough to deserve a second try." The pie baked through the noon hours, filling the room with the scent of cinnamon and warmth. Outside, snow blanketed the clearing, softening the world into a quiet they no longer feared. When the pie was done, they ate it by the fire, knees touching, the children curled close with full bellies and red cheeks. Hattie leaned against Zachary's shoulder without asking, her body fitting beside his like it had known that place all along. He didn't pull away. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something steady began to take root. Not a promise, not yet. But the shape of one. And in that shape, Zachary found something he hadn't known he was waiting for, a hand in his. A future he had not dared name. The snow held through the next morning, heavier now, pressed thick on the pine branches and dulling the sky to a quiet gray. Hattie stood at the cabin table, sleeves rolled, hair braided back. She was trying to sew a patch onto Peter's trousers, but her concentration kept drifting. Her eyes would flick to the window, then to the hearth, then to Zachary, who was oiling the hinges of the door with a bit of bare fat. "You always take care of things like that before they break?" she asked. Zachary wiped his hands on a cloth. "If something matters, better to tend it before it's past fixing." She looked at him a long moment before returning to her stitching. "I never learned that. Always waited until it was frayed clean through." He crossed to the stove, checked the beans simmering there, then set the lid back gently. "Some things hold better than they look." She smiled, faint and tired. "Some don't." Polly and Peter were outside beneath the eaves, bundled in Zachary's old scarves and playing at stacking snow against the base of a log. Their laughter drifted in faintly, muffled by the storm. Hattie listened without turning her head. "They've started sleeping through the night again," she said. Zachary nodded. "They're not waiting for you to wake them anymore." "No," she said. "They're not." She set the trousers down and reached for her cup, took a sip of lukewarm tea. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "Some," he said. "Not too far ahead. Just enough to keep walking." "If I stay," she said, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire, "what would that look like to you?" He didn't answer at first. He picked up a bit of wood, ran his thumb along its grain. "I'd fix the lean-to out back. Make it into a room. You'd have a place for your own things. The children could have shelves for their books. Maybe even a garden come spring." Hattie's hand stilled. "And me?" Zachary met her eyes. "You'd have a place at the table. A say in everything. And if you wanted it, you'd have me. Not just for now." The wind rattled the shutters once, then passed on. Hattie stood slowly, crossing the room to the window. Outside, Polly had taken Peter's hand and was leading him toward the sled Zachary had built years ago and never used. "I've never had someone ask what I wanted," she said. "I'm asking now." She turned, her eyes unreadable but not closed. "I don't know how to be someone's partner. I only ever knew how to hold things together when they were falling apart. You don't need to hold anything here. Just stand with me." She stepped closer, and he didn't move. When she stopped in front of him, she reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. "If I say yes, it won't be all at once. I wouldn't want it that way." Her hand settled over his. "Then I reckon I am saying yes." Zachary exhaled, slow and deep, like something long buried had loosened in his chest. He turned his hand beneath hers and held it. Outside, Polly called out, and Peter laughed in reply. Hattie looked toward the sound, her grip steady. "Come spring," she said, "I'd like tomatoes. Maybe some squash. I'll break the ground for it," he said. "Soon as the thaw comes." She leaned into him then, not out of weariness but choice. He rested his chin lightly atop her head. No promises spoken, none needed. The room was full already with warmth, with breath, with the sound of children returning, boots thumping snow from the porch. The cabin no longer felt like a place carved out of silence. It felt like the beginning of a life stitched together by steady hands, shaped by the quiet work of care. By the second week of snow, the world outside had thickened into a quiet that no longer felt like waiting. The sky remained low, the sun a pale wash behind thin clouds, and the trees stood heavy with white. The cabin had settled into a rhythm, one made not from necessity alone, but from small, shared choices. Zachary came in from the lean-to with a basket of potatoes and a dusting of snow on his shoulders. Hattie looked up from where she stood over the table, coaxing Peter through his letters with a slate and chalk. He's getting quicker, Zachary said, setting the basket down. Peter didn't look up, just carefully shaped a crooked E with his tongue between his teeth. He's nearly got his name, Hattie said. Polly's been helping him when I'm not looking. She's got a mind for order, Zachary said. Must get it from her mama. Hattie brushed a curl back from her cheek without answering. Her eyes lingered on his face longer than they used to. She'd stopped glancing away when he caught them. After supper, with the children asleep under quilts and the fire banked low, they sat at the table with 2 mugs of chicory and a game of checkers laid out between them. Hattie moved a piece without looking down. You ever wonder if the land remembers? She asked. Who's walked it? What's been lost on it? I think it remembers in the way the wind moves, Zachary said, studying the board. Or how the grass grows back thicker after fire. I buried a brooch near a river once, she said. Something my mother gave me. I didn't want Tom to pawn it. I've thought about that brooch more than I ever thought about him. Zachary moved a piece quietly. You'd go back for it? No, she said. It's part of whatever that place was. I don't belong to it anymore. He watched her across the flickering lamplight. You belong here, Hattie. Not just on the land. With us. She reached across the table and rested her hand over his. I know. They left the checkerboard where it lay and moved to the hearth. Zachary sat on the floor with his back against the wall, and Hattie settled beside him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder without needing to search for it. They didn't speak for a while, only listened to the soft tick of the clock and the wind moving across the eaves. I was afraid I'd forgotten how to want something for myself, she said. Zachary turned his head, his voice low. And now? I want this, she said. Not just the warmth or the safety. I want the shape of a life with you in it. He didn't answer with words. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. She leaned into him fully, her breath warm against his neck. In the weeks that followed, her limp faded. The lean-to became a room with shelves and a narrow bed, lined with wool blankets and a small window that caught the morning light. Polly arranged books on the shelf by height, and Peter pressed flowers between pages with the seriousness of a man twice his size. One morning, as the snow began to recede, Hattie stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour and cheeks flushed from kneading dough. Zachary stepped up behind her, slid his arm around her waist. There's a preacher rides through every few months, he said. Tends to the mining camps east of here. She turned slightly, her brow lifting. Is that so? We could ask him to stop by, he said. If you want it. She shifted in his arms, her smile quiet, sure. I'd like that. They were married in early April, beneath the budding trees behind the cabin. The preacher had a voice that carried and a smile that held no judgment. Polly picked early blossoms to tuck into her braid, and Peter held Zachary's hand so tight it left a mark. Hattie wore a dress the color of riverstone, simple and clean. Zachary had brushed every inch of his coat until it looked new. When she said her vows, her voice didn't waver. When he said his, he looked only at her. They planted their first seeds that same week. Beans, squash, turnips. A row of tomatoes that Hattie watched over like they were kin. Zachary built a fence around the garden to keep the mule from wandering too close. Polly helped stake the rows, and Peter made a game of chasing crows from the fence posts. At night they sat together on the porch, her hand tucked into his. The children's laughter drifted from inside, and the land stretched quiet and open around them. Zachary would sometimes look at her then, the lines around his eyes softer than they'd ever been, and say nothing at all. Hattie never asked for words. She'd simply rest her head against his shoulder and close her eyes, knowing she was home. Their life wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was built slow, with hands that had known loss and still chose to hold on. The cabin stood sturdy through every season that followed, filled with the kind of peace only earned by those who'd once gone without it. And in that quiet place, beneath the patient sky of western Montana, Zachary and Hattie wove their days together with the gentle strength of people who had endured, who had healed, and who had, at last, found the one thing they'd never dared name, a love that stayed.